In the month since my last best value GPU to buy video, there have been a lot of changes to the graphics card market. AMD launched the 7900 GRE to worldwide availability at $549 starting point. We've seen them lower the price of their 7700 XT officially, and then actual availability has been even lower than that. We've seen Nvidia's Super series of cards affecting the pricing of a lot of cards, including the 4070 Ti non-Super, which is getting phased out. But as supply is still available, it won't be resupplied, but as supply is still available, prices are dropping, but should you still buy it? And we've got Nvidia's RTX 3050 6GB getting reviews out there. I haven't got one of these myself yet, but we have seen reviews published on these, and is that a card you should be interested in? Well, the GPU you're interested in probably depends on your budget, and that's how I structure these videos. So if you're just like, I just got an unlimited budget, just what's the best GPU? Hey, buy yourself a 4090. Unfortunately, they're $1,800 and up. They're really good though. They're a lot better than anything else. So unlimited budget, hey, 4090 and the video, buy that. For everybody else, let's be mindful of the price point. So that's how I structure these videos. We look at each price class and we figure out what is the best value GPU in that price class. And also highlight price ranges where I think there's a particularly good value if you can hit that particular price range. Now, for a lot of people looking to buy a graphics card, honestly, $200-ish is where a lot of people would like to be. That's a pretty mainstream price point. Is there anything there? Well, like I said, Nvidia did just launch the RTX 3050 6GB, and it is significantly slower than the 8GB version. You're not just losing VRAM, you're also losing actual memory bandwidth and cores and all of that. It really should probably be called an RTX 3040 or something like that. Now, this GPU is interesting for people who cannot connect an external power cord to their graphics card. If your setup can only power your graphics card from the PCIe slot you plug it into, then this card might be interesting to you. But if that's not the case, if you can get any kind of external power, which is the case for almost anybody who's not like maybe trying to upgrade an old office PC that has some kind of weird power supply in it or something like that, then again, I don't have a 3050 6GB to test myself yet, but looking at a reliable review like something like techpowerup.com that we're looking at here, you can see that if you set the RTX 3050 as your 100% baseline, the RX 6600 from AMD not only has 2GB more VRAM, but it's 59% faster on average in their testing. And with that being the case, I think well, let's compare pricing. The AMD 6600 is $189 on the current market, meaning there's a $20 price increase to get 59% more performance in addition to the 2 extra gigabytes of VRAM. And so like if you took out a calculator and you do 189 divided by 169, you can see that you're paying about 12% more money for 59% more performance, in addition to the extra 2 gigabytes of VRAM. So that seems like a much better deal for anyone, and which would be almost everyone who can plug in a power connector to their graphics card, right? Now, you might be taking a look at that chart that we just looked at from TechPowerUp and being like, okay, but there's other options like from Intel, like the A580, A750, things like that. And also, when you were thinking about the RX 6600 from AMD, you might be like, but I really want to get an Nvidia graphics card. I know they're the market leader. That's what all my friends have, right? So in other words, we should talk for a second about the differences between the major graphics card retailers. Yes, Nvidia has most of the market, AMD's in second, and Intel's been trying to break into that, and there are differences in their technology, their software, things like that. So let's get into it. The main thing is, let's talk about Intel actually quickly first. So Intel, as a newer player, their drivers are less mature, which means as games come out, oftentimes, they don't you can't depend on everything just working, especially if you're playing obscure older games. And like I said, even with major new game launches, I've had issues with games running properly at launch. And while the Intel drivers have improved significantly, I would say that they're still not perfect. And so if I had similar performance for a similar price from either AMD or Nvidia compared to an Intel GPU, I would definitely go with the more mature software. So I would need to see a significantly better value from Intel. So if we look at something like the A580 at $165, sure, it's might look attractive compared to the 3056 gigabyte, but compared to AMD's 6600, I'd rather spend the extra $15 to get a little bit more performance and just a more stable software situation. So I've got to say that while Intel could be something you could consider, like I said, if it's similar performance to the AMD counterpart, I would rather go with the more mature software. Now, so how about between AMD and Nvidia? So the short version is NVIDIA's two main advantages if you're limiting yourself to gaming, right? So if we're focused on gaming, which is what my video is focused on, the two major advantages for NVIDIA tend to be better ray tracing performance and a better upscaler when we're talking DLSS versus FSR upscaling. Now, how much those matter depend a lot on the performance class we're talking about. Because if we're talking about this $200 price class, you're not going to be kicking on, what I would consider kind of optional bonus graphics like ray tracing. Instead, you'd be turning things down to try to boost performance. So when we're at the lower performance tiers, I don't think you should make your purchasing decision based off of better ray tracing performance. Instead, upscaling can be something that would matter more. Upscaling renders the game at a lower resolution and then reconstructs the image to look like a higher resolution that would match your monitor. However, DLSS does a better job of that than FSR does in general, and the image quality differences are actually more apparent the lower your monitor resolution is. Like at 1080p, there can be a pretty noticeable difference, whereas at 4K resolution, if you're at the quality level, upscaling, I still think DLSS has the edge, but it's much less noticeable, and FSR becomes much less of a downside. So basically, coming back to the price point we're talking about now, I would say the 3056 gigabyte is not strong enough for ray tracing, so that shouldn't enter into your decision at all. And the 6600 is so much faster that you're just going to be faster than even if you're not using upscaling, even versus upscaling on the 3050. Like upscaling at the quality setting doesn't usually double your performance, right? And we were seeing a 59% performance advantage. So in this case, I think it's a clear win for the RX 6600. And speaking of price classes where I feel like there's a standout in value, the RX 6600 is one of them. I think the RX 6600 is generally one of the best value graphics cards out there. That being said, it's also not incredibly powerful. It'll do a great job at 1080p, but you're certainly going to need to turn some things down for maximum settings to reach the frame rate targets you want, if you're playing newer games and things like that. That being said, it can play anything out there at reasonable settings at 1080p, and it offers great value. So this is a standout. If you want to go past this point, I think there's nothing offering a significantly better experience until you hit like $330, honestly. Let me show you what I mean. The 6650 would be the next kind of step up from here. It's $240, and 240 divided by 190, which is where we're at there, is about 26% more money for less than 26% more performance. It's a little bit under, about a 20% performance bump, something like that. So it's not a standout in value. The newer generation product, the RX 7600, is $250 on the cheapest, and then a lot more of them are closer to $260 or $270. And again, it is faster than the 6600, but it's not a mind-blowing difference. The RTX 4060 from Nvidia is coming in at $294 at the cheapest, and more of them are about right at $300. And these aren't much faster than the RX 7600, which you could get as low as $250, right? And these are all 8 gigabyte graphics cards that we're talking about. So the next time I feel like we reach a meaningfully different performance tier, with more VRAM as well is the 6700 XT from AMD. Now, it's coming in at $330, and there's not a lot of availability there, and I know that worldwide there might be even less availability. There is the 6750 XT that's coming in as low as $340, and I see more models available in the US at that price point. In this case, we're jumping up to 12 gigabytes of VRAM and considerably more performance than we were getting around that $200 price class. So I think that suddenly you're starting to feel like you're getting a significant upgrade in product, where you would either be, cranking the 1080p settings and frame rates, or going up to 1440p with maybe some reduced settings in the latest games. Some of the latest games do already go over 8 gigabytes of VRAM, so having 12 feels a lot more comfortable. So in general, I'm actually seeing, with a lot of availability on 6750 at $340, this becomes pretty attractive. Compared to the newer generation offering, like the 7600 XT from AMD, which has 16 gigabytes of VRAM, but comes in at $325 to $330 on the cheapest models and going up to $340 past there. It's very similar in price, but it is noticeably less performant. And at this performance tier, I think 12 gigabytes is plenty. The going up to 16 doesn't really do much for you in gaming at the types of graphic settings and resolutions that these cards are able to deliver. Now, you might be wondering, is there an Nvidia alternative here? Well, if you go with the 4060, you save a bit money and you're at $300, but I would much rather have a 6700 XT with 12 gigabytes of VRAM and more performance than a 4060 with 8 gigabytes of VRAM and less performance. What about the 4060 Ti? Well, the 4060 Ti is an 8 gigabyte card that's coming in close to $400, which is its MSRP. Some models are available around $380, $385, $390. So now you're paying a lot more money for 8 gigabytes of VRAM and not that much more performance than a 6700 XT, and especially if you're like, maybe more performance if you're talking ray tracing, but in just standard performance, or especially if in settings that spill over 8 gigabytes of VRAM, which definitely can happen, doesn't feel great. And if you go up to the 16 gigabyte version of the 4060 Ti, well, now you're talking $450. Granted, it's down from its $500 MSRP, but it's still, in my opinion, just kind of too expensive for the performance level you're getting, because the 16 gigabyte version doesn't beat the 8 gigabyte version in performance, unless the 8 gigabyte one would be spilling over its VRAM capacity. Like, it doesn't come with more cores or clock speeds or anything like that. So in general, I guess what I'm saying is we jumped from standout value with the RX 6600 at around a little under $200, and the next standout in value I'm seeing is the 6750 XT at $340, where you get a meaningful performance bump and more VRAM. What about past this point? Well, okay, again, we saw around $400 to $450. Nvidia is offering the 4060 Ti and 4060 Ti 16 gigabyte. AMD has dropped the price of their 7700 XT to occasionally hit as low as $400, although officially $420, and that's more of what I'm seeing right now. Well, so that's interesting in that it offers 12 gigabytes of VRAM, and it's kind of splitting the 8 gigabyte and 16 gigabyte 4060 Ti, and it does offer more performance. But this actually isn't the model I think is the standout in value here. The 6800 non-XT from AMD still has some availability from the last gen product at $390. Now again, I know worldwide that might not be the same thing, but in the US market, $390. This is offering about the same performance as a 7700 XT, but it comes in with 16 gigabytes of VRAM, and it's $30 lower. So my standout, if you have to go up to $400, is the 6800 non-XT, if that has availability in your region. It does in the US, which is kind of where I'm basing this video on. So that brings us to, okay, so we've got the $400 recommendation, the $200 recommendation, the $350 recommendation. So where do we go from here? So the next step up for Nvidia is the RTX 4070. It's a $530 product. And then, but where does AMD compete? Well, the current generation competitor is the 7800 XT, which comes with 16 gigabytes of VRAM instead of 12. The 4070 had 12. It also comes in a lower price at $490, a little bit more performance. But I actually have a problem with this, which is, if you look at the last generation product from AMD, the 6800 XT is very close in performance to the 7800 XT and still has 16 gigabytes of VRAM. And I can find a one in stock as low as $460 right now. Now, granted, there's not a lot of stock there right now, but I would say that if I was considering the 4070 level of performance, but that was stretching my budget, I'd actually check, again, if this 6800 XT is available at $460, that's probably the best value. And the 7800 XT, again, is a strong alternative. But if you are going to go up to the over $500 price point, so if you're going over that, if you're looking at this 4070 at $530 and up from there, well, that's where AMD's 7900 GRE came in recently at $550. If you're talking $550 versus $530, that's not a meaningful price difference. We're in the same price class. And not only does the 7900 GRE have 16 gigabytes of VRAM, but it has a lot more cores than the 7800 XT did, more compute units, which helps with its ray tracing performance competitively. So interestingly, it doesn't stack up terribly against the 4070 in RT performance, and it beats it in rasterized performance significantly in a lot of cases, and it has more VRAM. So let me put it this way. If you're going to be spending what you would on a 4070, I would actually recommend the 7900 GRE instead, or just going all the way down if you had that low price 6800 XT available, maybe going with that. So at this point in the video, a lot of you are probably thinking, wow, this guy's actually just an AMD shill. He's just going to recommend the AMD product at every price point. No, that's absolutely not the case. And past this point is where I'm going to start recommending more Nvidia products under certain use case conditions, which you'll have to decide if that makes sense to you. Because, like I said, when we're talking about the difference between AMD and Nvidia, you have the upscaling difference and the ray tracing difference. And up to this point, I don't think the ray tracing performance from Nvidia is strong enough to make a significant buying decision, because the super impressive ray tracing effects would still be a little bit out of reach at competitive performance levels. Whereas once we go to the 4070 Super, I'm going to say that this, from the Nvidia side of things, is a standout product in terms of value. Its only real downside is 12 gigabytes of VRAM is fine right now, but there's a lot of games already pretty much right at 12 gigabytes at 1440p, which means that the longevity of that VRAM potential, obviously you can turn on graphic settings and whatnot and it'll be fine, but it'll start causing some issues at max settings probably soon, but we can't really predict the future. I'm just saying that's kind of I wish it didn't have that. Now, when I look at the 4070 Super versus the 7900 GRE, the 7900 GRE costs less and has 16 gigabytes of VRAM, but it doesn't cost a lot less. And I think the 4070 Super is actually strong enough that a lot of the heavier ray tracing settings make sense. It does win at ray tracing. It has the better upscaler. All of that starts weighing in to where I'd say if you can stretch to the $600 price point, I would personally pick the 4070 Super. So if $600 is the ceiling, I'd go with the 4070 Super. Other people, if the 12 gigabytes of VRAM concerns you, go with the 7900 GRE instead. But if 12 gigabytes of VRAM with the potential to maybe have to deal with that a little bit in the future, I think the 4070 Super is pretty interesting at $600. Now, past this point, if we're looking at the Nvidia side of things, like I said, the 4070 Ti non-Super is marked down considerably from its original MSRP, but it's still about $80 to $90 or even $100 more than the 4070 Super. And it's not that much faster than the 4070 Super. and it still only has 12 gigabytes of VRAM. So my argument is, I don't think it makes sense to buy the 4070 Ti over the 4070 Super unless they basically cost the same price. Still not worth $100 more, despite the discount. Now, the next Nvidia GPU past that point is the 4070 Ti Super, which is an $800 MSRP and is available at that price point. And this is where Nvidia finally jumps to 16 gigabytes of VRAM at a performance tier where you actually would want the 16 gigabytes of VRAM. And it's hitting a ray tracing performance level where even path tracing modes are actually pretty compelling at 1440p resolution. So at 1440p, 16 gigabytes of VRAM is great. You could path trace with quality level upscaling to get around 60 FPS. Kicking on frame generation past that point smooths it out on a high refresh rate display for single player gaming. So the 4070 Ti Super is less technical like performance per dollar than the 4070 Super, but it really, it's the first Nvidia GPU that really doesn't have a lot of big downsides. The ray tracing performance is there. The VRAM is there. The price is still a bit more than you might want to pay, but it's pretty interesting at this price point. You could compare it against the 7900 XT, which currently costs $100 less at $700. The 7900 XT does get you 20 gigabytes of VRAM, but again, I'm fine with 16, so I really don't find that a selling point. It does cost $100 less, but it doesn't have as good of an upscaler, and its ray tracing performance is significantly worse at a performance tier where I think ray tracing is meaningful. So I will say the 7900 XT is the best $700 graphics card. So if your budget ceiling is $700, well, there you go. But I will say if your budget can go to $800, I would rather have the 4070 Ti Super. And I think that it's the best. It's not the best value NVIDIA GPU, but like I said, it's the lowest priced one that doesn't have any major concerns about it, right? With its 16 gigabyte VRAM buffer and a lot of ray tracing performance. Past this point, I really don't recommend a lot. Like the 4080 Super is starting to actually come available at its MSRP of $1,000. So that's nice because for a long time after launch, it was actually well above that. But it is starting to be available right at $1,000. There are some available right at that MSRP when I actually check the market. So that's cool. But the 4080 Super doesn't do a whole lot that the 4070 Ti Super doesn't. The 4070 Ti Super already had 16 gigabytes of VRAM, and it already had ray tracing performance at a pretty good level. So the 4080 Super gets you more of that, but for $200 more, it's less price to performance, and you're not really getting any new features or VRAM capacity or anything like that. So, I mean, if your budget goes to $1,000, sure, consider the 4080 Super. It is better than a 4070 Ti Super, but it's not better value than a 4070 Ti Super. The 4080 non-Super is basically the same thing as a 4080 Super. So, I mean, okay, if they're cheaper, buy them, but right now they look to be about the same price and the same performance, so you have that. Now, in between, we do have the 7900 XTX. The 7900 XTX, one model is showing $910, but a lot of them are $930, $940. So the thing is, like, compared to the 4070 Ti Super and the 4080 Super, I think the unfortunate fact is that the 7900 XTX doesn't beat a 4080 Super, and it's not that much less money. And when you're talking $1,000, it's really not that, like I said, not that much less money. And if you compare it to the 4070 Ti Super, it is faster in rasterized performance, but again, you do get the better upscaler and a lot of very usable ray tracing performance on the 4070 Ti Super. So I'd rather see the 7900 XTX come to more direct price competition with the 4070 Ti Super and not be so close to the 4080 Super, because I really feel like it's in a bit of a no man's land at like $930, right? Anyway, that's kind of my thought process on that one. And then past this point, like I said, you got a 4090 it's definitely better than a 4080 Super and a 7900 XTX. It also costs $1,800 at the lowest price point, up from there. So if budget doesn't matter, then just buy a 4090. Other than that, I've made my recommendations today. So kind of in summary, I think the standouts are the 6600 if you've got to buy around the $200 price point, especially if you need to stay under it. I think that the next standout is the 6750, which gets you more VRAM, a lot more performance, I think that VRAM difference does matter at this price point and the kind of performance that you would hit. So I like this a lot better than the Nvidia alternatives. And if you have 6800 non-XTs in your market for around $390, that then becomes the $400 recommendation with 16 gigabytes of VRAM, a lot of performance, and it looks a lot better to me than the 4060 Ti 8 gigabyte that it's directly competing with from Nvidia. It also beats like the 7700 XT from AMD. And then if you're gonna jump to, if you wanna stay under $500, then check out if there's any 6800 XTs available around $460 in your area, because if they are, that's a heck of a deal as well. And it priced about the same as a 4060 Ti 16 gigabyte. They both have 16 gigabytes. The 6800 XT is a lot faster, to the point where I definitely take the lower end upscaler, that kind of thing. Past that point, I think the 7900 GRE, if you're looking at the like $500 to $550 price point, the 7900 GRE is very interesting. But beyond this point, I think the 4070 Super is very interesting from a value proposition from Nvidia, with the one caveat being the 12 gigabytes of VRAM. The 4070 Ti Super at $800 kind of shores up the issues with VRAM and has a lot of ray tracing performance, where I think all of those features do get my recommendation over the AMD counterparts in this price range. And again, past that point, yeah, you can spend more money if you want to, but like you get more and more diminishing returns without a lot of meaningful differences until you get the 4090, where yeah, diminishing returns, but it enables 4K experiences that the other cards just don't do comfortably, like 4K path tracing and things like that. All right, that's the video today. Hopefully you guys found it useful and or interesting, and I hope all of you have an excellent day.